On a quiet suburban evening in Houston, Texas, a chilling act of rage unfolded. A devoted wife turned murderer, fueled by years of simmering anger and a final act of betrayal. What led her to take such a drastic step? What secrets were hidden behind the perfect suburban facade? Today, we unravel the story of Evelyn Grant, her husband Matthew, and his lover Vanessa. A love triangle that ended in blood and shattered lives. Evelyn Grant was a woman who carried the weight of a troubled past, but wore her fierce loyalty like armor. She grew up in a small Texas town, the youngest of 5 children, in a household where tempers often flared and voices rose more often than laughter. Her father was a strict disciplinarian who believed in order above all else, while her mother was a quiet, anxious woman who avoided conflict. Evelyn learned early on that the only way to be heard in her family was to be louder and stronger than anyone else. As she grew older, Evelyn channeled that fiery determination into building a life far removed from the chaos of her childhood. She worked tirelessly through her 20s, managing a small floral shop and dreaming of stability, a home, a family, and a love she could count on. That dream came closer to reality when she met Matthew Grant in 1997, a charming real estate developer with ambitions that mirrored her own desire for success. Matthew was everything Evelyn had been searching for: ambitious, attentive, and seemingly unshakable. He offered her the security and stability she had longed for, and she gave him her unwavering loyalty. By the time they married in 1998, Evelyn and Matthew seemed unstoppable. Together, they purchased a modest home in Houston, Texas, where Matthew's real estate ventures flourished. Over the years, Evelyn poured herself into supporting Matthew's growing career. She was his most devoted advocate, attending networking events by his side, hosting dinner parties for potential clients, and managing the household with precision. But Evelyn's devotion came with a price. Her fiery nature, which had been an asset in her younger years, began to strain the marriage as life's stresses mounted. Evelyn struggled to manage her temper, snapping at Matthew over minor disagreements and overreacting to situations that most people would brush off. In 2005, after a particularly explosive argument, Matthew gently suggested that Evelyn seek help for her anger. Though reluctant, Evelyn eventually began therapy and was prescribed medication to help manage her emotions. Evelyn's love for Matthew was unshakable, but her insecurities often got the better of her. She worried that her temper would drive him away, and those fears only fueled her intensity. Her emotions became a storm that Matthew weathered, though it wore him down over the years. By 2010, he began confiding in his closest friend, David, about the challenges of living with Evelyn. He described feeling trapped in a cycle of love and frustration, where every moment of calm seemed overshadowed by the threat of another storm. Despite the turbulence, Matthew loved Evelyn deeply. He admired her passion, even when it became overwhelming. He reassured himself that their bond was strong enough to survive anything. For a time, it seemed like it might. In the early 2013, Matthew's life took a turn when he met Vanessa Garcia. She was introduced to him during the renovation of a luxury property he was developing in downtown Houston. Vanessa was an interior designer, only 28 years old, but already making a name for herself with her bold, modern style. From the moment Matthew met her, he was struck by her energy. Vanessa had a way of lighting up every room she entered. She was vibrant, full of life, and exuded a carefree confidence that stood in stark contrast to the tension that filled his home. Vanessa had her own complicated history. She was raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to provide for her family. Growing up, Vanessa watched her mother struggle, and it drove her to succeed. She put herself through design school while juggling part-time jobs, eventually landing a coveted internship at a prestigious design firm. By the time she met Matthew, she had built a reputation as a rising star in the Houston design scene. But beneath her polished exterior, Vanessa carried her own scars. She was no stranger to the allure of danger, having been involved in tumultuous relationships that left her wary of commitment. At first, Vanessa and Matthew's interactions were purely professional. They met during client meetings and discussed color palettes and furniture layouts. But as weeks turned into months, their conversations began to veer into personal territory. Vanessa asked Matthew about his family, his career, and his dreams. Matthew, who had long felt unheard at home, found himself opening up to her in ways he hadn't with Evelyn in years. By the August 2013, their professional relationship had evolved into something deeper. It started innocently, a lingering coffee break here, a shared laugh there. But the chemistry between them was undeniable. Matthew tried to resist his growing feelings for Vanessa, knowing the risk it posed to his marriage. Yet, the pull of her lighthearted nature was too strong to ignore. For the first time in years, Matthew felt truly at ease. It wasn't long before their meetings became secret rendezvous. Vanessa was drawn to Matthew's stability and charm. She found his quiet confidence appealing and admired his drive. But she was also aware of the risk they were taking. Matthew made it clear that his marriage was complicated but not over. Vanessa told herself that she could handle being the other woman, but deep down she wanted more. Their affair unfolded in secrecy. Matthew carefully deleted text messages and emails, and he avoided taking calls from Vanessa when he was at home. Despite his precautions, the weight of his double life began to show. He became distant with Evelyn, spending more late nights at the office and avoiding confrontations at home. Evelyn, ever perceptive, began to sense that something was off, though she couldn't yet put her finger on what it was. By November 2013, Vanessa's patience was wearing thin. She began demanding more of Matthew's time and attention, urging him to make a decision about their future. She started showing up at his office unannounced, leaving voicemails when he didn't answer, and even making subtle comments during public events that hinted at their relationship. It was a reckless move, but Vanessa was tired of hiding. Evelyn noticed the changes, though she didn't yet know the cause. Matthew, once so attentive, seemed distracted and distant. She began to feel the old fears creeping back, the fear that her temper had finally driven him away. But Evelyn had no idea just how deep Matthew's betrayal ran. The stage was set for the storm that would shatter their lives. What began as a quiet betrayal was about to explode into a tragedy no one could have foreseen. What would Evelyn do when she discovered the truth? And how far would Matthew and Vanessa go to keep their secret hidden? It was a cold night in January 2014 when Evelyn Grant stumbled upon the truth that would shatter her world. She had been cleaning the kitchen, putting away the last of the dishes from dinner, when she noticed Matthew's phone sitting on the counter. He had left it there while taking a shower, something he rarely did. For months, Evelyn had sensed that something was wrong. The late nights, the unexplained absences, the quiet moments where Matthew seemed lost in thought. It all pointed to something she couldn't explain. But now, with his phone unlocked and unguarded, she felt a wave of temptation she couldn't resist. Scrolling through his messages, she saw nothing out of the ordinary at first: work conversations, reminders from his assistant, and exchanges with friends. But then she noticed a thread labeled simply with a first name: Vanessa. Her heart sank as she clicked it open. The messages were undeniable. Photos, flirtatious texts, and plans for secret meetings painted a vivid picture of a relationship far deeper than she had feared. Among the messages, one sent just hours earlier froze her in place. "Can't wait to see you tonight, lover." Evelyn's hands trembled as she stared at the screen. It wasn't just the betrayal that struck her. It was the carelessness, the audacity. She felt a rush of humiliation and fury that made her chest tighten. The man she had devoted her life to, the man she had stood by through thick and thin, had been living a double life. And now, she had proof. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. She sat alone in the living room, the glow of Matthew's phone illuminating her face, as she pieced together the timeline of his infidelity. Hidden in his deleted emails, disguised under work aliases, were weeks, months of planning rendezvous and conversations with Vanessa. Each message was a dagger to Evelyn's heart. She felt waves of anger, sadness, and humiliation crash over her. But one emotion began to rise above all others: vengeance. Evelyn didn't confront Matthew that night. Instead, she decided to watch and wait. Over the next few weeks, she studied him closely, noting every movement, every excuse. She went through his calendar, noting the business trips he had planned and the nights he claimed he'd be working late. She even followed him once, her heart pounding, as she tailed his car to a secluded hotel where he met Vanessa. From her car, she watched them walk arm in arm into the lobby, laughing and leaning into each other. In that moment, Evelyn felt the last threads of her restraint snap. She left without being seen, but with her mind made up. Matthew and Vanessa would pay for what they had done. By March 6th, 2014, Evelyn had spent weeks preparing for the inevitable. She had rehearsed every step in her mind, from the moment she would catch them together to what she would do next. That night, she knew exactly where to find them. Earlier that afternoon, she overheard Matthew on a phone call, telling someone he would be meeting a client at a local restaurant. Evelyn recognized the tone in his voice. It wasn't the professional tone he used with colleagues, but the soft, almost playful tone she had once heard him use with her. She knew it was Vanessa he was meeting. The restaurant was a small, dimly lit bistro on the outskirts of town, far enough from their neighborhood to avoid familiar faces. Evelyn parked her truck across the street in the shadow of an abandoned storefront. She watched from the darkness as Matthew arrived first, wearing the same blazer she had ironed for him that morning. 15 minutes later, Vanessa appeared, her long hair glinting under the streetlights as she approached him. Evelyn's stomach turned as she watched them greet each other, with a closeness that left no room for doubt. They were more than lovers. They were plotting a future together. Evelyn stayed in her truck, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. From her vantage point, she could see them through the restaurant's large windows. They sat at a corner table, leaning in close, their faces illuminated by the flicker of candlelight. The sight of them laughing and smiling while her world crumbled around her was too much to bear. Evelyn's mind raced with memories of the life she and Matthew had built together. The sacrifices, the love, the promises, and how it had all been reduced to this. Hours passed. As the restaurant emptied out, Matthew and Vanessa finally emerged, their voices carrying through the quiet parking lot. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest as she watched them walk hand in hand toward Matthew's car. They stopped under a streetlight, their faces close as they whispered to each other. The moment stretched on, and then, as if sealing their betrayal, they leaned in, their bodies inches apart. It was at 10:32 p.m. when Evelyn made her move. Her hand reached for the ignition, and the roar of the truck's engine shattered the silence. Matthew and Vanessa turned toward the noise, their faces frozen in confusion and fear as the headlights bore down on them. Witnesses would later describe the sound as a deafening growl, followed by the screech of tires as the truck accelerated. The impact was brutal and immediate. Vanessa was thrown several feet, her body crumpling on the pavement like a broken doll. Matthew was struck harder, his body twisting unnaturally as it landed near the curb. The scene was chaotic, glass shattered, metal crumpled, and the air filled with the echo of horrified screams. Evelyn stepped out of the truck, her movements slow and deliberate. She walked toward Matthew, who lay moaning in pain, his face a mask of shock and agony. She looked down at him, her expression cold and unflinching. Then, without a word, she reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and dialed 911. Her voice was calm and steady as she reported what she had done. By the time the police arrived, the scene was a nightmare. Witnesses gathered, murmuring in disbelief as they pointed to the wreckage and the bodies on the ground. Evelyn stood by her truck, her hands trembling but her face eerily composed. When officers approached her, she didn't resist. She simply handed over the keys and waited as they placed her in handcuffs. The last thing Evelyn saw before being led away was the lifeless body of Vanessa Garcia lying motionless under the streetlight and Matthew's bloodied, broken form struggling for breath. It was over. She had taken everything from them, just as they had taken everything from her. The crime scene on the March 6th, 2014, was the kind that would linger in the minds of those who witnessed it. Broken glass glittered under the streetlights, scattered across the asphalt alongside bloodstains that marked the trajectory of Evelyn's rage. The bodies of Matthew and Vanessa lay crumpled where they had been flung, surrounded by bystanders frozen in shock. The hum of distant sirens grew louder, slicing through the tense silence as the first responders arrived. Evelyn sat in the driver's seat of her husband's truck, the front end of the vehicle smashed and streaked with blood. Witnesses later said she appeared unnervingly calm, her hands trembling as she took slow drags from a cigarette. Her face was pale, her eyes distant, as if she were already replaying the events in her mind. When the police approached her, she did not resist. She extinguished her cigarette and raised her shaking hands. Her expression was one of resignation, as though she had been waiting for this moment. As the officers handcuffed her, Evelyn made no effort to explain herself. She glanced once toward the wreckage of her husband and his lover, but there was no emotion in her gaze. It wasn't defiance or regret, just an unsettling emptiness. The onlookers, many of whom had witnessed the crash from the restaurant or surrounding businesses, whispered among themselves. Some spoke of the terrifying roar of the truck's engine. Others of the unflinching determination on Evelyn's face as she bore down on her victims. Few could reconcile the composed woman being led away in handcuffs with the violent act they had just witnessed. In the hours following her arrest, Evelyn was taken to the police station and booked on charges of vehicular homicide. Her fingerprints, mugshot, and blood alcohol test were taken, though it was quickly determined that she was sober at the time of the incident. Investigators began piecing together what had led to the crime. Evelyn offered little in her initial statements, admitting to the act but refusing to provide any justification beyond a quiet admission that she had found out about her husband's affair. In the days that followed, the investigation revealed a chilling level of premeditation. Detectives recovered Evelyn's laptop and phone, combing through her search history and personal notes. What they found painted a disturbing picture of her mindset leading up to the murder. Among the searches were phrases like vehicular manslaughter penalties in Texas, how to kill with a car, and how fast do you have to drive to kill someone on impact. Investigators uncovered bookmarked articles on crime of passion defenses and the legal implications of intentional vehicular homicide. They also found a folder of saved messages and screenshots from Matthew's phone, evidence Evelyn had gathered of his affair with Vanessa. The notes she had typed alongside these screenshots were laced with bitterness, detailing the moments she felt most betrayed. In one entry, dated January 12, 2014, Evelyn wrote about seeing them together at the cabin. Her words were cold and detached, a stark contrast to the raw emotion she must have been feeling. It was clear she had been planning her revenge for weeks, if not months. The physical evidence from the scene corroborated the timeline of events. The truck's black box data showed that Evelyn had accelerated moments before impact, confirming that the crash was intentional. Witness statements painted a vivid picture of the incident, with many describing the sheer force of the collision and the horrifying aftermath. Forensic analysis of the truck revealed traces of Vanessa's hair and Matthew's blood on the hood, further cementing the brutality of the act. The emotional fallout was as devastating as the physical evidence. Vanessa's family, heartbroken by the loss of their daughter, struggled to come to terms with the senselessness of her death. They spoke to the media about Vanessa's bright future, her ambitions as a designer, and the love they believed she had for Matthew. Their grief was compounded by anger, not only at Evelyn, but also at Matthew, whose decisions had ultimately led to their daughter's death. Matthew survived the crash but was left with severe injuries. He suffered a broken pelvis, fractured ribs, and internal bleeding that required emergency surgery. As he lay in the hospital, recovering under heavy sedation, investigators interviewed him about the events of that night. Matthew, racked with guilt and pain, provided a full account of his affair with Vanessa and admitted that Evelyn had discovered their relationship weeks earlier. He described the tension that had been building in their marriage for years and expressed regret over the choices that had brought them to this point. Evelyn's family was equally devastated. Friends and relatives who had known her as a passionate but loyal wife struggled to reconcile the loving woman they knew with the calculated killer described in the police reports. Some believed she had been pushed to the edge by years of emotional neglect and betrayal. Others condemned her actions outright, arguing that no amount of betrayal could justify the violence she had unleashed. By March 20th, 2014, investigators had gathered enough evidence to charge Evelyn with first-degree murder for Vanessa's death and attempted murder for the attack on Matthew. The charges reflected the premeditation evident in her actions, and prosecutors began preparing for a high-profile trial. The case captured national attention, with news outlets dissecting every detail of the affair, the crime, and the lives it had destroyed. Evelyn remained stoic throughout the proceedings, offering no apologies and making no attempt to defend herself. To those who knew her, this silence was both unsettling and tragic. It was as though she had accepted her fate long before the crash, resigning herself to the idea that this was the only way her story could end. As the community waited for the trial to begin, the ripple effects of Evelyn's actions continued to spread, leaving behind a trail of grief, anger, and unanswered questions. This is the story of Evelyn Grant, a woman whose love turned deadly and a betrayal that shattered lives. What would you do in the face of such betrayal? And how far is too far when love turns into rage? We have other cases where love turned very deadly and toxic. The case where a woman's toxic relationship with her husband leads to affair and pregnancy. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on our other very captivating cases. See you in the next video.